I've always been that devoted wife and mother, you know? My marriage was never like a movie, but it was stable and predictable. My husband and I had fallen into a calm, almost automatic routine. We lived under the same roof, raised our children together. But over time, the connection we had became something distant, almost silent. And you know what? I didn't even care. I thought it was normal, part of the package of growing old with someone. The day it happened. Hold on. I'll tell you right away. First, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any stories. My son Ethan just turned 21, and our house always seemed to be full of life because of him and his friends. On the weekends, the living room would be filled with laughter, lively conversation, and the sound of clinking glasses. I thought it was wonderful. Seeing my son happy, surrounded by people who valued him, filled me with joy. Among his friends, there was a boy named Ryan who stood out in a way I couldn't quite explain. Ryan was taller than most, had messy blonde hair, and had such a friendly demeanor that it seemed to light up the room. He was always polite, very respectful, but there was something else. A striking presence that was hard to ignore. At 24, he was only a little older than Ethan, but he had a maturity that made him seem different, more centered. Everything changed on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Ethan and his friends were in the pool, playing, laughing, and kicking a ball. I was in the kitchen preparing some snacks for them when Ryan appeared, still wet, with a smile that seemed to light up the room. "Mrs. Carter, do you need any help?" he asked, his voice calm and his eyes sincere. I thanked him, shaking my head. "No, thanks, Ryan. You can go back to the pool and have fun with the guys." But he didn't go. He stayed there, leaning against the counter, watching me in a way that made me a little uncomfortable. His gaze was calm, but at the same time deep, as if he was seeing me in a way no one had seen in a long time. "You always take such good care of everyone," he said, his tone soft and heavy. "You deserve a moment to rest, too." His words took me by surprise. It wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it, with a kindness that touched me deeply. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to being seen that way. I tried to smile to lighten the mood, keeping my tone light. "That's what mothers do, isn't it?" I said. But the way he kept looking at me, oh, that look. It was as if he said something that didn't need to be said, something that made the air in the kitchen feel different. And in that moment, however brief it was, something changed in the atmosphere. Something that couldn't be ignored. If you'd like to have a friend like my son has, click like. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice Ryan in a different way. It wasn't something I planned, but he seemed to catch my attention without making any effort. His smile, so natural, lit up any room, and his presence had something welcoming, almost magnetic. He found little excuses to spend more time near me, especially in the kitchen where I usually was. I always thought it was just a simple admiration on my part, something fleeting and harmless. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Until one quiet night, things changed. Ethan had gone out with his friends, but Ryan stayed. He mentioned that he wasn't feeling very well, so I offered to make him some tea. We sat in the living room, and the silence in the house that night seemed unusual, almost remarkable. Without the usual hubbub, everything felt more intimate, closer. As we talked, I realized how easy it was to talk to Ryan. He didn't just listen. He really paid attention, with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. His eyes would stay fixed on mine, not in an intrusive way, but as if he were genuinely interested in understanding what I had to say. I ended up spilling more than I had planned. I told him about the challenges of my day-to-day life, the fears that sometimes haunted me, and how at times loneliness seemed to envelop me. He didn't interrupt me, just held my hand firmly but gently, and looked at me as if he could see everything I was feeling. "You are amazing, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice low and full of sincerity. "You deserve to feel special." His words touched me deeply, not just because of what he said, but because of the way he said it. It was as if, for an instant, he had broken through all the invisible barriers I had kept around myself. The moment was so simple, yet so full of meaning, and in the silence that followed, I felt something inside me change. Before I could even react, Ryan leaned in and suddenly kissed me. It was something completely unexpected, and I was paralyzed for a moment. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that I should stop him, but my body felt trapped in a long-forgotten sensation, as if that small spark had reignited something inside me. Then, the sound of the front door opening brought reality back with a jolt. Ethan's voice echoed through the house, full of energy, and panic took over me. Ryan took a quick step back, pretending nothing had happened. I stood there, motionless, trying to process what had just happened, while my heart beat faster. I spent the rest of the night in silence, with a mixture of guilt, confusion, and fear taking over me. That night, sleep was impossible. Lying next to my husband, Steve, who was fast asleep, oblivious to the chaos that was happening inside me, I couldn't stop reliving the moment. My mind replayed the scene as if searching for answers to what had led me there. How did it happen? How did I let it happen? The guilt was almost suffocating, but mixed with it was a feeling that I couldn't explain and didn't want to admit. The next morning, I did everything I could to avoid Ryan. I figured he wanted some distance too, since Ethan had commitments and wouldn't be home. I thought it would be easy to spend the day without seeing him, trying to bury what had happened. But late in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my heart raced. There was Ryan, holding a small toolbox and trying to look casual. "Ethan said you needed help with the closet in the laundry room," he said with a small smile. His voice was light, but his eyes... Oh, his eyes showed a nervousness that he tried to hide. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. I knew I should tell him that everything was fine, that I didn't need help, but the words wouldn't come. The silence between us was short, but heavy, as if it said more than any conversation could. I invited Ryan in, trying to keep it natural, even though my mind was in a mess. He came in with the toolbox in his hands, but his movements were more hesitant than usual. As I led him to the laundry room, I noticed that the environment around us seemed different, filled with a silence that spoke volumes, although neither of us said what we were really thinking. "It's just this hinge here," I explained, pointing to the cabinet. My tone was practical, but my voice sounded slightly shaky, something I hoped he wouldn't notice. Ryan knelt down to examine the cabinet, opening the toolbox with the precision of someone who had done this before. As he worked, the metallic sound of tools echoed in the laundry room, filling the empty space with a strange familiarity. "Have you been doing this long?" I asked, trying to break the silence. I wanted to divert my own thoughts to something safer, something everyday. "My father was a carpenter," he replied without looking up from his work. "I learned from him. It was kind of our way of spending time together." The simplicity and sincerity in his answer took me by surprise. I hadn't expected Ryan to be so open about something so personal. It created a pause in the tension that hung between us, if only for a moment. I took the opportunity to ask him more about him, discovering that there was much more to Ryan than his disconcerting presence and his easy smile. He spoke about his childhood with a mix of nostalgia and lightness that seemed to contrast with the maturity he always displayed. As he adjusted the hinge, our conversations flowed almost naturally, but there was still something in the air, something that neither of us dared to mention. Ryan finished the job quickly, standing up with a small smile of accomplishment. "There," he said, tapping the cabinet lightly to test its firmness. "It should last a few more years now." I thanked him, keeping a smile on my face, although inside I was trying to decipher what it all meant. He began to put away his tools, and as he did so, I noticed that he hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the right words. "Well, I think I'm done here," Ryan finally said, breaking the silence. He looked at me for a brief moment, and in that moment, I felt like there was something more to be said, something we were both deliberately avoiding. As he said goodbye and walked towards the door, I stood still, watching him. The sound of the door closing behind him left a strange emptiness in the house, as if a silent storm had passed through. And then, I was alone, surrounded by my own thoughts. Why did this interaction seem so loaded with meaning? And what would come after this? If you're curious to know what happened next, comment on part 2 and we'll soon post the end of this story.